Dear all, a very warm welcome to the Havells Insignia Presents ADEX, a series by Realty Masterclass. Friends, ADEX Talks is a unique initiative dedicated to facilitate the development of an ecosystem for world-class designers in India. The one-of-a-kind Architecture Plus Design Talk Show aims to enable the process of collaboration with the best in the industry that the world has to offer and to position architects, designers, and manufacturers as partners offering complete solutions and not as mere providers of a product or a service. So here I am, Sapna Srivastava, editor Realty Plus magazine, and let's begin with a brief introduction of Realty Plus. Friends, let me share a small presentation of what Realty Plus is all about. Realty Plus magazine is part of Exchange for Media and BW Business World Group. The monthly publication is the real estate vertical of the group and was created to cater to the needs of the real estate business. For past 16 years, Realty Plus has been at the forefront of news and stories influencing the world of real estate. It is now available in both print and digital edition. Apart from our monthly magazine, Realty Plus series of collector's edition coffee table books are premium editions launched once in a year, spotlighting prominent personalities, products, and brands of the real estate industry. Our latest initiative is the Super CXOs, India's Top 100 Realty Influencers Coffee Table Book, which features Indian Realty's dynamic Super CXOs who are transforming the sector through their leadership and vision. Moving on from the publications, Realty Plus Conclave and Excellence Awards virtual series features eminent speakers, engaging discussions, and lively virtual award ceremonies felicitating the top performers in Indian real estate, PropTech, co-working, and building product segments. Realty Plus also produces various online products and events under its Realty Plus Digital Connect initiative. Under the umbrella of Realty Plus Digital Connect, we have Realty Plus Masterclass webinars such as the one that we have today, which features subject matter experts and industry leaders in an insightful and informative conversation on current and relevant topics. We also have the Realty Plus Real Talk series that features video interviews with influential leaders from varied segments of real estate to share their honest views and opinions and real facts and figures. Not to be missed, every morning is the Realty Plus e-newsletter that goes out with latest news, views, and opinions from across realty sector of India and the world. We are also very strong on the social media platforms, and that is how we stay connected with our readers, peers, partners, and promote our products. To know more about us, do get in touch with our publisher and business head, Ms. Tripti Kedia, and we'll be happy to be connected with you. So this was a small introduction of Realty Plus, and now coming back to the program of today, I welcome Mr. Vivek Yadav, Senior Vice President, Havells India Limited, to please share his views on this one-of-its-kind ADEX series presented by Havells Insignia, and also welcome our eminent speaker of the day. Vivek, over to you.
Thank you, Sapna. So, good afternoon, friends. And I welcome on behalf of Havells, all of you here on this second episode of ADEX. I also welcome our special guest for this episode, architect Russell Gilchrist. On a lighter note, I think Gilchrist is a very popular name in our country. Russell, you share the last name Gilchrist with a famous Australian cricketer who happens to be a very popular name in our country. So before I give you more details on ADEX and what it's all about and our larger program of engaging with the specified community, I think let's run an AV about Havells, a small corporate video, which will give a good glimpse of what Havells is all about. Can we have the AV, please?
For more than 6 decades, Havells India Limited has been focusing on building a better future. A future where technology is used to drive progress, improve business outcomes, and create a better quality of life. Today, Havells stands tall in the FMEG sector as a major power distribution equipment manufacturer with a strong global footprint, owing to its innovative future-ready products for a wide spectrum of applications. With the acquisition of Lloyd in 2017, Havells has made a foray into high-potential consumer durable segment with offerings of air conditioners, LED televisions, washing machines, refrigerators and dishwashers. The new synergy further complements the brand's deeper into home's vision. Havells owns some of the most prestigious global brands like Crabtree, Lloyd, Standard and Rio. Its global network constitutes over 5,000 professionals across its offices. As part of its Make in India philosophy, Havells is manufacturing 97% of its products in-house. With 14 state-of-the-art, fully automated manufacturing plants located across India, Havells offers superior quality and globally benchmarked products to its customers. Havells has set up a large distribution network to set new benchmarks in prompt delivery and service to customers. Over 11,000 dealers, 150,000 retailers and 700 plus Havells Galaxy exclusive brand showrooms across the country are helping customers to choose from its wide range of products. Havells has a robust supply chain management system with 31 warehouses located pan-India. The meticulous forecasting and demand planning delivers seamless tracking system. Havells is the first FMEG company to offer doorstep service, offering a seamless post-purchase experience. It has the largest service network with 800 plus service points covering 441 towns, 24/7 across India. Havells Center for Research and Innovation, CRI, at Noida, with a team of highly qualified engineers and designers, continuously work towards creating differentiated and innovative products while adhering to stringent quality norms at par with international standards. Havells products are certified by nationally accredited laboratories such as CPRI and ERDA. Havells has a strong in-house IT vertical which develops innovative technology platforms to support its robust service and supply chain management system. Growing together is ingrained in the ethos of Havells and has resulted in it launching many innovative and profitable schemes for its dealer community. Havells has strong credentials in B2B and large government projects as well, such as lighting up Kolkata railway station and partnering with NBCC India Limited to beautify and transform the night view of India's heritage monuments like Humayun's tomb, as it believes in the philosophy of spearheading the progress of the nation without ignoring the past. Havells has taken giant strides to create an innovative world full of possibilities, not only for itself, but also for all its channel partners and customers, with a commitment to improve people's lives and help create a better global society. Havells is inspiring the world and making a difference.
Okay, so I'll give you a little bit more details of what ADEX is. So ADEX is part of our larger program, which is called Havells Insignia. Havells Insignia program has been created to create a unique platform to engage with the best minds in the specifier community in the country. And we will have multiple pillars under this. So ADEX is one of the pillar. The entire program of Havells Insignia is curated under a framework of 4I, which is incubate, innovate, interact, and influence. Apart from ADEX, there will be 3 more that we have identified as pillars. The second is going to be a series of white papers on specific topics, which could be educating the audience to light a new or different perspective, delve deeper into issues, trends, and policies which could be related to residential and commercial infrastructure, on maybe some causes that the experts feel strongly about, and deep dive into their implications and benefits. Then it would be maybe a yearbook which will be exclusive and standout annual publication for cutting edge design ideas, innovative viewpoints, which could also set the agenda for the year in terms of design themes. Maybe globally benchmarked works by leading specifiers across the globe. And also it could be an ideal reference for the budding architects, interior designers. And lastly, about recognizing the best amongst the best in the country in terms of their projects that they've executed during the year. It would be a contest for picking and choosing the best in the industry. So these pillars all would be executed with specialists who will help us in executing these programs, like Realty Plus is helping us execute the ADEX series. So that's the whole program about, where we will continue to interact with and engage with the specifier community, the best in the industry today, and co-create some of the designs, some of the products, and execute them with their help. So that's what the program Havells Insignia is all about. And to take this episode forward, I hand over back to Sapna.
Thanks, Vivek, to giving us a glimpse of what Havells is doing, and it's the programs that you are introducing. I think they are the need of the hour to bring all the stakeholders together. So definitely a very welcome move from Havells, I must say. And let me give a brief profile of Vivek. He's an industry veteran with over 31 years of experience in electrical and automation, having worked in all domains from residential and commercial buildings to industries and infrastructure. And he has extensive experience in products and solutions for circuit protection in low voltage and medium voltage to automation in industries and homes. And at Havells, he's currently leading the domestic circuit protection, electric wiring accessories, and home automation business, along with projects and enterprise business, which cut across all business verticals in Havells. So who better to set the tone for this program of the day? So Vivek, should we now welcome our speaker of the day? Should we go ahead?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So friends, now let us bring on stage the star of the day. Joining us from Chicago, the global industry expert, Russell Gilchrist, Principal Design Director, Chicago, Gensler City's Client Challenge GC3 advocate, a very eminent speaker here with us. Let me give a brief introduction of Mr. Russell Gilchrist for our audience today. Russell Gilchrist has more than 30 years of experience working for multiple design firms in the US, Europe, and Asia, and he focuses on high performance, low energy building design. Russell is a former member of the Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat Advisory Board, for which he also served as a height committee member, on top of being active with various technical working groups. Russell earned both his Bachelor of Architecture and Master of Architecture degrees from Oxford Brookes University, and his primary interest is high-performing, low-energy, low-carbon design solutions. He has worked across 4 continents and completed award-winning projects in the US, Europe, and Asia. And let me just give a brief introduction of the projects that he has worked on. One of them is the Pearl River Tower, the world's most sustainable super tall building in Guangzhou, China. He has also been involved in the award-winning projects 88 Wood Street in London and Winery in Penafiel, Spain, the Reichstag Parliament Building in Berlin, London Bridge Jubilee Underground Station, Maison du Chapon in Paris, and Glambourne Opera House, Sussex, UK. One of his latest projects, I think one of the most interesting that I find, is the renovation and repurposing of the old Chicago main post office into a mixed-use hub for business and commerce. So some very evident projects, some very eminent experience. Dear Architect Gilchrist, thanks for being here with us today, and I hand it over to you now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sapna. Let me try and share my screen and see if I can get this going. We can probably skip that one now because we've seen several of these. It's not moving. Oh, there we go. Yes, I'm primarily going to talk today about a repositioning project in Chicago, as was mentioned. I think it's probably arguably the largest repositioned building in the world at over 2.6 million square feet. But I just wanted to just kind of briefly touch on the fact that I've been involved in kind of repositioning buildings or repurposing buildings. There's several names for it for most of my career. And I think I will show you some examples of those before I go into the post office and do a deep dive, because I want to show you the history of the building, the condition that we inherited it in, some of the building characteristics, some of the challenges we faced, some of the restoration issues. It is a very heavily protected landmark building. The Americans are very protective about buildings that are not very old. As a Brit myself, and you in India, we have many buildings that are much, much older that we seem to be less precious about, but a building only needs to be 50 or 60 years old in America for people to start jumping up and down and wanting to protect it, which is fair enough. I've been very lucky to work for a number of good design practices around the world. So my portfolio is very varied before I came to Gensler. And just to give you an example of that, I've sort of, this was a very interesting exercise for me, just to kind of look back, and I hadn't realized that I'd been sort of involved in repositioning work, which is my next slide. But I have been involved in projects from tiny boutique shops in London for Issey Miyake, through to performance halls, through to headquarters buildings. I worked on Leadenhall, which is affectionately known as the cheese grater, when I was at Richard Rogers Partnership. I've been part of the redesign of the Glyndebourne Opera House, as Sapna mentioned, a winery in Spain, and also the Pearl River Tower, which is arguably at the time one of the highest performing energy efficient buildings in the world. So very, very varied experience, very, very lucky to have that. Trying to progress. There's a bit of a delay, I think, on the slides. Please move. Okay. And I thought I would include this slide because I hadn't quite realized that I'd been repositioning buildings for some time. So when I was a very young architect in the mid-'80s, there was an old tobacco warehouse in London, Butler's Wharf, and we converted that into a design museum. It's since moved from there, but that was my very early foray into repositioning buildings. Another building was a not landmark building, but it had a very interesting terracotta facade. This was a competition at the time. We were one of 6 architects to kind of compete, and our solution was the only one that retained the facade, even though we didn't technically have to. We kind of saw it as a kind of very characteristic building, and one that people had a history with, and we didn't see that we should knock it down if we could protect it, keep it, and build around it. Repositioning work takes many forms. We're doing a lot of project work in Chicago where we're repositioning lobbies that were maybe 30, 40 years old. They need a refresh, and we're doing tenant amenities. We're inserting new tenant amenities into all sorts of new office buildings in downtown Chicago. I've currently got one just under construction now in Detroit. It's an old book depository building where they stored books, naturally, which is actually a project for Ford. It's for some of their incubator kind of companies, and it's a 3-story mini version of the post office, much, much smaller, but similar challenges. That's an ongoing project that should be complete maybe in about 18 months. Aon Building in Chicago, which is the same client as the post office, and actually is one of the reasons why we got hired to take on the challenge that is the post office in Chicago. So the Aon Building, some of you may be familiar with it. It's one of the tallest buildings in Chicago, sort of Art Deco kind of type building. We refreshed the lobby and some of the tenant spaces. And also, I think Sapna mentioned this, I had a brief spell at Foster's where we repositioned the Reichstag into the Parliament building, the current Parliament building. So again, very varied experience. But I want to talk to you about the old Chicago post office. We call it awakening a sleeping giant. The Chicago practice of Gensler is also repositioning the Willis Tower, which is literally across the water on the other side of the river here. But I'll stick with the post office, which is the big 30s building, 20s, 30 building that you can see in the foreground there. It wasn't always that size in the very beginning. The building's right on the river and right adjacent to railway tracks. More of that later. But this was the original East Building, which was built in 1921 by architects Graham, Anderson, Probst, and White. As you can see from the photographs, just a very slim 6-story building, the full length, which is almost 800 feet, very, very long building. And for those of you who know Chicago, the road in the foreground is Van Buren, and the road at the rear would be Harrison. And this is an aerial view of Chicago at that time. You can see the river wending its way through. Chicago doesn't quite look like that anymore. The Loop, which is everything to the right of the river, is very built up, and the birth of the skyscraper happened in Chicago, and it's very well developed. You'll see that in some later photographs that I'm going to show you. But again, I would just draw your attention to the fact there's railway tracks immediately to the left, 10 or 11 tracks. It's very well served in downtown. It's with 2 major stations, Union Station and Ogilvie Station. But there were 2 later additions, because the post office is in fact actually 3 different buildings. There's an East Building, a North Building, and a South Building. Again, more of that later. This is actually what we call the North Building. The North Building and the South Building were built at the same time, the East in 1932. And what happened was they actually modified the existing East Building and knocked down the edges of the East Building and rebuilt them with 4 major kind of pavilions on the roof. So that is the completed building in 1932. The fact that it is 3 buildings presented several challenges, which I will take you through in a moment. Again, I've just put this slide in. Lake Michigan is to the top of the page. The post office is actually on axis with Daniel Burnham's plan. You can see the big parks to the top of the screen. And this axis, there's actually a road that's been subsequently driven through the middle of the post office building at grade level. It's called Congress. It's actually the beginning of Route 66 that goes all the way to California from Chicago. But this is very well located on the downtown, we call the major CBD of Chicago the Loop. This is just to the south of the Loop. But the post office is going to act as a catalyst for redeveloping the rest of Chicago to the south of the post office. At least we hope so. Anyway, this is one of our challenges. We've got a major 6-lane highway that goes through the middle of our building. And that's an issue partly from a security perspective, but partly because it obviously breaks up the contiguous nature of the ground floor plate at grade level, but more of that later. We started this project, our client is called 601 West. They're a real estate developer, primarily office, out of New York. They own several buildings in Chicago, and we've probably repositioned several of them. But the post office was in a little bit of a bad state when we inherited it in 2016. As you can see from these images. There's lots of these images. So it was designed as a postal sorting office with the emergence of catalogs in the 30s and 40s. The post office was built to deal with all this mail, as they call it in the States. One of the biggest buildings in the world when it was designed or completed in 1932. We also inherited a lot of scrap metal in this project. as you can see, there was a lot of equipment that just was left there. You can see the kind of state that the building was in. There are some artifacts here that we had to maintain. This is quite interesting. The image on the left is actually a series of galleys that were on every floor. You can see some apertures there. There were actually people patrolling that, looking at the postal workers in the sorting office to make sure that they were not stealing any of the mail. So very, very highly controlled environment. And more about that later, because landmarks and Illinois and the national parks, who control how much preservation we have to do on this project, were very keen for us to preserve exactly this and the historical relevance of some of these features, even though they don't really have any great significance in terms of commercial office space that people want to kind of lease. Again, you can see a lot of water damage. These are actually timber floors that have actually just curled up because there was so much moisture and mold in the building. Lots of connecting spirals. It was a postal sorting office after all. So the quickest way to get packages sorted from one floor to the other was to use these chutes. Some of these chutes we've actually accommodated within the building, again, at the requests of the National Parks and Landmarks Illinois. The guy on the right was actually our construction manager. He's actually standing on some scales. There was a lot of artifacts. We were going to have a museum of some of these items. We scrapped that idea in the end, but we are keeping some of the artifacts that were there and existed in the post office building. This is a repeat of an earlier slide, but I just wanted to show you. The one on the left was taken in 2001, where actually the inside of the building was relatively dry and pretty well looked after. The previous owner before our client did not look after this building. It suffered a lot of vandalism. Rainwater came in and gave us a lot of problems when we had to dry the building out when we were starting to refurbish it. One thing that does remain intact is the old postmaster suite. So this is, again, a relic from 1932. It was in remarkably good condition. It needed very, very little renovation, but it has been renovated and upgraded. This is actually in the north building, which we kind of call the admin building. The south building was mainly big sorting office floors, and you'll see when I come to a section at the moment some of the relationships of the various floor levels, because not many of them match up or they're not contiguous. You can see there was some very, very heavy doors. Obviously, the post office was securing some very valuable documents and parcels. We've maintained or refurbished some of these very, very heavy vault doors, some of which were weighing up to 3 tons. That's quite a hinge you can see on the one on the left. I've included the image on the right. Again, this is the north building, which had a corridor that spanned in the middle of the floor plate from the east side to the west side. And basically this corridor connected the 2 main elevator banks that are in the north building. And Landmarks again insisted that we kept this corridor and the mosaic floor and reinstated the ceiling, even though our client wanted to use this as an open plan office. We were actually held to reinstating all of these corridors in the north building. Partly the reason we were held to it is, as I mentioned, it's a very heavily protected building, but it's also that we were getting tax credits from Landmarks and the national parks to the tune of $80 million. And if we diverted from any of the advice that they gave us, then we didn't get the tax dollars. So we were pretty much beholden to them in terms of what they demanded, they pretty much got. This is the main lobby of the post office. This has also been a scene of at least 4 films, 2 of which have been Batman films, just to throw that in there. It's a little bit of trivia. The lobby was in pretty good condition. Some of the marble was cracked. It was pretty dirty. And a lot of the kit and equipment and the metalwork needed to be refurbished. But this is what we inherited in 2016. This is one of my Gensler colleagues. We had to completely rebuild the light fittings, though, pretty much from scratch. And you can see they're pretty big, but they have been fully restored in this space. And there's lots of little artifacts, as you can imagine, from a 1930s building, a series of kind of plaques, which were done in gold leaf originally, showing the various kind of forms of transport that we have. And this is just a before and after of some of the historic refurbishment of the main lobby. You can see on the left, we've got dilapidated kind of paintwork, and you can see on the right, the grill work has been cleaned up. These are functioning grills. This is how we're conditioning the main space, the main windows. These windows were so big, we had to recondition them in situ because we couldn't take them out. They're literally 40 feet high and sort of 15, 18 feet wide, and they're made of bronze. So they're very, very heavy. And you can see that we've reinstated the gold leaf on the ceiling as well. And that's what the lobby looks like today. So a little bit of a more spruced up version, repaired marble. The floor has been repaired where it needed to be, and the lighting has been reinstalled and the gold leaf reinstalled. One of the things and one of the challenges which affected some of our design time, but also affected our budget quite heavily, we did expect to have asbestos in the building, given the period of the building and the fact that it had gone through multiple refurbishments through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. We expected to find asbestos. We did not expect to find lead paint, curiously enough, in the main sorting office floors. These are the double height, 19 feet floor to floor ceilings where all the kit has been cleaned out, as you can see. And this is going to be our new office space. This space is roughly 340 feet wide. It's nearly 900 feet long. The east building is to our right. The north building is straight ahead. Again, we were allowed to take some of these hanging galleries that I mentioned earlier on. You can see where they were strung off from the main structure. But as a consequence, we had to patch and repair some of the structural steelwork, well, composite steel and concrete beams. They had to be repaired. One of the issues with a building that's so big is when you have a problem throughout all the floors, it tends to be pretty expensive to have to kind of replace and treat them. And this is one of the refurbished, well, prior to being refurbished, but it was cleaned up. It's actually been repainted and it looks a little bit better than this. But these were one of the galleys adjacent to the north building that we had to keep. Here you can see some of the windows. Again, this is in the main sorting office, 19-foot high space. The actual bones of the building, when we dried it out, was in pretty good condition. But our building services engineers reckoned there was enough moisture in the fabric of the building, the brickwork and the concrete, to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So it took us about 6.5 months to dry out the building. At the time, there were no windows in it. We had fans in there, and we were just trying our best just to dry out the building. There's over 2,000 new windows. Again, landmarks in the national parks insisted that we match the existing profiles of the original 1930s windows, which is pretty tough because they were steel and they were single glazed. But we managed to get within 1/8 of an inch, or 3 millimeters, of the existing profiles in aluminium, and they're obviously double glazed. They're not operable because that would have affected all the kind of internal building environment. And just to give you, sorry, this is an American football field, so not a soccer pitch, but this gives you some idea of the scale of this building. You can put 4 NFL football pitches on the top of the roof. And I'll get to the roof a little bit later on because we have actually landscaped it. So I'm just trying to give you an idea of the size and scale of this project. It's almost like an airport terminal in terms of its footprint. So the red building is actually the merchandise mart. You might know that. That is a 4.5 million square foot building in Chicago again. At the time of it being built, the post office was the largest. The merchandise mart usurped it and was almost twice the size, but it's smaller in footprint. That footprint fits inside the post office footprint. So I've got a few little diagrams here that just give you a bit of a recap of just how the building has emerged over the years. So the kind of slightly light pink color is actually the old existing building. The green building to the kind of right of here is what we call the north building. And the yellow piece is the larger floor-to-floor height south building, as we call it. And how we started to strategize, because this is essentially predominantly an office for tech companies primarily, not exclusively, with some amenities, which I will take you through. And at the ground level, there's obviously the main entrance hall, but there's some F&B and there's some retail, service retail at the base of the ground floor level. And the space to the other side of Congress, which is to the left of where you see the arrows, which the traffic is driven through, is all of our back of house space, where we have boilers, mechanical plant, and actually car parking. So this is a section through the building. What I forgot to tell you, or haven't told you yet, is the blue line is the 11 train tracks that are underneath this building. And you can see above it, you can see the whole, or I hope you can, of the highway that goes through the middle of this building. So we've got a highway that goes east-west, and we've got a railway tracks that go north-south. So that actually bifurcates the ground floor plane. So on the left-hand side of this section is where the main lobby that I took you through, the refurbished. And on the right, which is the Van Buren side, on the right-hand side, which is obscured slightly by my video, is the Harrison side. There's also a secondary entrance. But the main way that we are connecting the north of the building to the south is via the second level, not the grade level, because you cannot cross the highway. It's a 6-lane highway. So it's a slightly interesting situation where there's an escalator sequence that takes you up to the level 2, and level 2 is the only floor where all 3 buildings are contiguous. Every other floor level does not have contiguous floor plates. Some of them, the south and the east might match up, or the south and the north might match up, but all 3 floor plates only match up at the level 2 datum. This also, because we have a road and we have a railway tracks, Amtrak below us, the red area is actually a no-fly zone for us. We couldn't put any lift pits in there or escalator pits. We could not make any penetrations to the Amtrak below us at any time during the construction. So what we have here is the pink squares are actually passenger elevators, and you can see they're concentrated almost entirely on the north of the building, on the left-hand side of the image. The red squares or rectangles are actually freight elevators. And you can imagine, because it was really a sorting office, the emphasis was on getting goods and materials around the warehouse part rather than people. It was fairly highly mechanized, so there weren't that many people. And most of the people were in the admin building on the left-hand side in the north of the building. So this is one of our major challenges is how do we actually redistribute passenger elevators throughout the length of this floor plate in a logical and efficient manner. So what we did is we took largely a lot of the freight elevators out. We kept some to the top right-hand side where the loading bay is to give you access to all the floor levels. But we had to redistribute. It's still fairly uneven because 18 of the elevators, 18 of the 27 in the end elevators ended up being on the north side of the building. So the other 9 were distributed around the other 2/3 of the building. There's a little diagram that's just showing you, the one on the left is cut north-south. And because the north building and the south building were built at the same time, you can pretty much see that 2 levels of the sorting office area, the 19-foot floor-to-floors, actually equate to 3 levels of the office building and the north building. So at least we have some ability every 3rd level to connect everything up. But you can see on the south building and the east building, which is only 6 stories, it's got a lower floor levels. The east building is 6 levels, the north building is 12 levels, and the south building is 9 levels. So you can see that it's only at level 2 that everything matches up. And the east building and the south building go out of sync in no real logical manner, which presents other challenges when we're, well, it's a kind of interesting challenge when we're trying to make floor plates contiguous. The selling point from the client was to be able to provide Chicago with large floor plates, 250,000 square feet potentially, the lower levels, 200,000 square feet, the upper levels. And we did many, many different space plans for all of this. This was theoretical for us because Gensler at the time was only engaged in the shell and core. But this is trying to show you how we would lay out the north building. And if you look very closely, you can see the gray highlighted corridor that connects the 2 elevator cores on the north side, the left-hand side, which we had to maintain. So that by definition ends up being more cellular in nature or less open plan. There is a light well in the north building to bring light down. But the remainder of the south building and the east building is shown here. And this can hold up to, we imagine, 1,600 people with all the attendant restrooms and other amenities that we might need on any particular floor. We did various kind of options to show how the space might be used. There's various, just checking my time here. We did numerous. I'm showing 3 here, but we must have done at least 30. Another characteristic or interesting piece of this is the building is very, very heavily protected. And the national parks and landmarks would not let us touch the building. But on the west side of the post office, we do have the ability to give a main anchor tenant their own dedicated front lobby. Everybody else will be coming through the north lobby, the one that you've already seen that's been refurbished. But if we had a tenant that was taking sufficient amount of space, we could give them their own dedicated lobby with a canopy and a drop-off. But the canopy would not be allowed to touch, or very minimally touch, the existing limestone fabric. This is a ground floor plan. You can see the 6-lane highway driving through the middle of it. Van Buren is the main entrance on the left. Harrison is the secondary entrance on the right. So you can see from this floor plan that the 2 halves of the ground floor plan do not tie in together. You literally have to go up an escalator sequence, which you can probably see in the middle of the green kind of highlighted piece. You can see 3 escalators that would take you up to the 2nd level, and I'll show you an image of that in a moment. And similarly, there are 2 escalators on the south side, which is the white part. You can see that this is mainly back of house, and it's parking. We do have 189 parking stalls on site. Lots of amenities in the building. This is actually a view of, these are renderings because the food hall is still under construction at this moment in time. It's been hampered by COVID, so it's not a fully finished space. But this is a view looking east towards, back towards Chicago across the river. And this is the riverside. Chicago is a beautiful river, and it's a real amenity. There's a river walk. Unfortunately, it's not fully connected along its full length. But you can see here, we have a plaza on the west side, which spills out from the food hall, which is on the right-hand side. And again, tenants and general public could spill down to the river walk level. And Chicago does have a river taxi as well, so this could be a nice way to arrive at work. I've shown you this image because you can see the escalators kind of hiding behind a column. We cut a huge hole in the level 2 level to visually connect the lobby level. We're standing effectively in the refurbished lobby, but we're looking south towards Harrison with a big hole so that we had a visual connection with all the amenities on level 2, but also to kind of signal to tenants and building users alike that the escalator sequence was there in the middle of the image to take you up to the main circulation route, which is level 2. You can see there's a raised plinth before you get to the escalator. We do have a ramp for ADA compliance, but because we were not allowed to put an escalator pit into the Amtrak space below, we had to hide that pit in the raised podium that you can see there, hence the steps. This is the main arterial link that links the buildings north to south. And we've started to create a little kind of museum piece where we're displaying artifacts there. All the elevators can be accessed off this main route to get to all the floors. And this level there is car parking behind that kind of zigzag kind of wall that's housing all the artifacts of the old post office museum wall. This is the secondary south elevation, entrance way from Harrison. You can see a pair of escalators going up. This is a much more modest. Again, this could be a dedicated access point for a particular tenant if they were prepared to take enough space. The strategy that the leasing agents and the client had is they did not want tenants smaller than 100,000 square feet or 10,000 square meters. So amenities, and I'm sure I'll get lots of questions on this later on. What am I doing for time? I think I'm going to be okay. We had a lot of debate about what tenant amenities we should include. Obviously, a tenant lounge is a must. This building is going to house probably 12 to 13,000 people. But it's very difficult to know what to do speculatively. So we had a lot of debate about what specific tenant amenities we should do day one, what we should try to fold in later on. And I'm going to take you through some of those. We do have a tenant library. This is a device-free zone that all tenants can use. It's not open to the public. It's just for tenants only. This is all on the second floor level. We have obviously the ubiquitous fitness center, including a boxing ring, which this lady is working out in. This is quite a big space. This is probably about 15,000 to 20,000 square feet of fitness center, every fitness kind of activity that you could possibly imagine. Again, not open to the public, just tenants only. We had a spec suite. Spec suite, for those that don't know, we had a series of spaces that we could fit out as a potential office space so that users or tenants or potential tenants could see how they might use the space. They could actually take the space if they really wanted to, and we would build a new spec space. We actually had 3 spec suites. Slip through that. We have a marketing suite as well with a bar so that we could bring potential tenants in and show them the video and show them all the marketing material that we had on the building and tour the building. We had a dedicated marketing suite as well and a bar, which you'll see in the next slide. We're getting towards the end now. And one of the biggest assets that the building has is the roof terrace. We have a 4-acre roof terrace. You can see Willis Tower to the right of the building. This is a fairly unique space. It's one of the largest parks in Chicago, not quite as big as Millennium Park or Grant Park, but it's certainly the largest park atop a building, and a great amenity. We've got basketball courts, we've got tennis courts, we've got other sports. There's actually a running track as well for people to use. You can see there the running track and various other kind of sporting activities. And we also have a bar and a restaurant at this upper level with the potential for 2 more restaurants. So that is the story of repurposing an old giant, we call it. So that is how we repurpose the old Chicago Old Post Office. I went through that very quickly to give you a good overview. We had lots of challenges. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for you to ask, but that is the Chicago Post Office. Any questions?
So that was repurposing the giant, as Russell mentioned. We can stop the share screen now, and we'll have Russell on the screen. So Russell, some very interesting points you made, and especially working with the limitations, making them part of the development, and most importantly, while making a building, renovating a building to modern sensibilities, also keeping the history of the building maintained. So some very powerful example we saw there. One of the questions that we have here is, how does one qualify an old building for adaptive reuse, for repositioning?
Oh, that's a great question. I think, and I actually, I thought I'd get that question actually, and I was actually thinking about India and all of your kind of industrial and Victorian buildings and civic buildings, and the huge potential that you have in India to start repurposing, and maybe you already are. I know China is doing the same. China, I've worked a lot in China. Even 10 years ago, they would pull down a perfectly good building, but now they're realizing what their heritage is and how they might repurpose it. It's obviously, from a sustainability perspective, it makes more sense in terms of you've already got that embodied energy that the structure has kind of already endured. So if the building is capable of being repurposed, and I think the post office tested that to the limit, to be honest, just because it was in such poor state that took a lot of budget that we had not imagined that we would be using at all. And one of the, you asked the question, and it's very difficult. Any developer that's on this call or on this webinar, I would up your contingency for unforeseen happenings. The lead paint cost about $8 million. That was unforeseen. The asbestos was going to cost $6 million. It ended up costing $17 million. We had track fans to put in for Amtrak, which cost another $12 or $13 million. So there's, I don't know, I can't add all that up, but maybe that's nearly $40 million that you're not getting any return for at all, because you haven't really put anything back that you can lease yet. So I think it obviously depends on the scale and size of a building, and I don't think it needs to be this old. There's a lot of buildings in Chicago that were built in the 70s, office buildings that are no longer fit for purpose for office, because floor-to-floor heights tend to be greater now than they were in the 60s and 70s. But they're being repurposed for either hotel use or residential use. So I don't think there's any hard and fast rule to kind of criteria. I think you have to look at the building. You have to look at what the gap in the market is that you're trying to fill and what that programmatic use is. The feeling from our client this was a unique building with unique spaces, 19 feet floor to floor, or almost 6 meters floor to floor, is amazingly high. Gensler in Chicago, we have an old department store, and our floors are 13 feet floor to floor, and that's pretty high. So 19 feet is exceptional. And that was considered to be a unique space that was a good selling point. And Uber have taken nearly 500,000 square feet of that space. So, and the building has leased up to almost 82%. It's not fully occupied yet, just because of the trouble we've all been facing over the last 10 to 12 months. That slowed things up, but we have leased 80% of the building. So a developer made a good call with our brokers in terms of picking the Chicago Post Office. It is actually one of these buildings that have been potentially gone through at least 4 or 5 iterations. I think Gensler have done at least 2 iterations since it became empty in 2001. So a lot of people looked at it and decided it wasn't for them. Our client decided that he would do it. A large factor in that was the tax credits. I will not kind of sugarcoat that. There was nearly 80 to 100 million of tax credits, but it did restrict us heavily because we had no choice but to do whatever the national parks and landmarks told us. So I think it's building by building. I don't know if I can give you any better advice than that, but it's kind of worked out for our client 601 West. They're very happy.
Okay, great. So that's what matters. Vivek, Russell just mentioned how it's not easy to quantify budgets, location, the condition of the building, a lot of things that have to be taken. What you have to say after seeing this entire transformation that Russell just showed us.
Yeah, I think very interesting. I would say the scale and size of the project is really, really amazing. And in India, I find, there could be a lot of correlation here because in large cities like Delhi, Bombay, Kolkata, there are many, many heritage buildings which can actually go in for change like this, and where we could see the heritage and common people coming together and utilizing those buildings more effectively. Okay, but I think the challenges could be of different kind because the buildings, I'm not sure in what kind of shape they are in terms of the safety of those buildings. So probably there are some more aspects. I think maybe Russell can comment on that. So apart from this, I would also like to ask one more question. While we saw your work through our own research that we did, it's not only just the the heritage buildings or the old buildings that you do, but I think you are famous for tall buildings and mixed use development. Okay, so the obvious question from that, in today's time when we are living through the pandemic, we may come through COVID, but the threat of the pandemic, I think, would remain with us. So my question is that in terms of design philosophy, how it is going to get impacted in designing, particularly mixed-use developments in future. What will be your view on that?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think there's several pieces to that. I think there's the immediate current COVID and slightly post-COVID, which I think is going to be more restrictive and more difficult to do. And I think of large-scale mixed-use projects, and I think of particularly elevators, and people trying to socially distance. What would otherwise be a 16-person elevator would maybe only have 4 or 5 people in it, everybody standing in a corner because they want to be distant from others. So, but that is a relatively short-term issue, and there will be issues around that in terms of how you manage that, both, the amount of time that people will take to get to their destination in the building, but also the amount of people that are backing up in the lobby to get in the morning. So there'll have to be kind of facilities management kind of protocols whereby maybe we're staging entry in the building from 7:30 to 10 o'clock, you know, just to reduce that flow. Whereas most people, I don't know in India, but most people, you know, will be going to the building between 8:30 and 9:30, and then you've got the reverse flows at lunchtime and then back again and then in the evening. So I think elevatoring and lobby management in the COVID world are the biggest thing. Obviously, other issues we're experiencing is trying to go to frictionless as possible, so people are not touching something. So app-based kind of technology to kind of facilitate how you would normally get around a building. I think there's going to be a huge issue in terms of air quality and just maintenance, and I think it's going to be a differentiator, because those buildings that were not very good before COVID are going to find themselves redundant or not leasable unless there's some major overhauls. And I think a lot of developers, particularly in Chicago, are trying to figure out what upgrades they're going to do. What does that do to the bottom line? If they're only partly leased anyway, this is a huge cost. So I think there's going to be a lot of buildings that are going to fall by the wayside a little bit in terms of their viability to be leased, particularly with younger tenants who are probably more concerned, or they're more concerned on a number of levels in terms of the planet and having an energy efficient building, but also more of an awareness of building air quality, and particularly, you know, kind of app-based stuff. Everybody will be sitting at their desk now trying to work out what their air quality is in their space. And, you know, so I think landlords and building owners are going to be very, very nervous about what upgrades they have to do to their air systems. And the obverse of that is anybody that's thinking about designing a new ground-up building, whether that's a high-rise, a mixed-use, or even low-rise, you should be thinking about installing the best air systems, building systems you can possibly install, because if you don't, you'll be building a dinosaur from day one. So that was a very broad kind of answer to your question, and there's lots of nuances in there in terms of just what amenities and other things are going to be expected in mixed-use developments, particularly kind of co-working kind of issues. But I think on a very broad infrastructure level, I think there's a short-term issue, and then I think there's a medium, longer-term issue that is going to really kind of change the quality of the environment. The amount of space that we build and how we use that space is going to be changed dramatically over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, good. I think these are some of the good perspectives that you brought about. But generally, you know, the memory of general public is short, and you know, once you come out of such situations, you tend to forget. But I guess the policymakers and the building bylaws makers, I think they need to incorporate some of the regulations in building design that would be, I think, more sustainable for future. Okay. One more question. I would, go back to maybe, an old architecture or a heritage kind of a building. When you redesign, I mean, how much of technology can you use? Because there is definitely restrictions, when you're touching any heritage building or an old building. But how much of technology you can use so that you're not, increasing the carbon footprint, and from that perspective, what could be, you would take care and you would use in terms of technology and such kind of gadgets or electrical equipment you would recommend in reducing the carbon footprint?
That's another good question. I think it sort of depends. That's a not definite answer. I think it's always difficult to know. I think if you've got an end user that you're designing a building for, it's much easier to be able to have the discussions in terms of what user requirements might be, because it will be a customized building, and generally, our sophisticated developer clients and tenants kind of know what they want, and they're aware of what's in the market. I think the difficulty comes when it's a shell and core kind of speculative offering, and how much does the developer put in from a technology perspective. And we even had that discussion on the post office about what size of conference facilities we had, and what sort of technology we were going to put in there, because the larger tenants, and we were really targeting larger tenants, are not going to want to share their conference facilities anyway. They're going to want them for themselves. So do you put something in that's redundant and no one uses because the smaller tenants can't use a large conference center? So, but there's all sorts of technology out there in terms of occupancy detectors, which I think are going to become norm. At the moment, they're seen as an added expense or a cost premium. But I think when we can start to understand that if you're, leasing 40,000 or 50,000 square feet of space, or even 20, or even something smaller, and people are working at the weekends, but there's only 4 people in, you don't have to have all the lights on, and you don't have to have all the building systems on to take care of those 4 people. I think we're going to be looking a lot more at kind of zoned areas, very heavily zoned areas, much smaller, so that when people are at their desks, they can receive the air and the light and the artificial light and all the stuff that one would imagine. But if there's a space 20 feet away that no one's in, then those systems will be off. And I think that becomes more acute when we're going to be probably spacing further away from one another as we come back to work in the next, certainly in Chicago, we're probably going to be reducing the capacity of our office by probably 50%. So all the more reason for having more localized control systems. Yeah, it's a capital cost, but I think depending on the long haul, over a 10, 15, 20-year payback, depending on the length of your lease, that will be money that you will get returned. So I think building controls are going to get a lot more sophisticated, and I think they're going to become standard and the norm.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Russell. I think good inputs. So I would request Sapna to take some more questions, because there would be...
Yes, Vivek, we have a related question. What you just asked is, about construction material. You asked about the technology, what kind of technologies one can use in redesigning a building or repurposing a building to create a low carbon footprint. We have another question which says, does the choice of construction materials influence the operational energy demand of buildings? Russell.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I think I think we're going to be moving away from all glass buildings. I think that's going to start to become, even though glass technology is getting more and more sophisticated, I think we'll see more of building integrated technologies like solar maybe. But I think there's something to be said for a well-insulated building, and siting of buildings. The best energy efficient passive move that you can make as a designer or architect is making sure that your building is properly sited in terms of understanding where the sun path is, making sure, if you can, that your smaller elevations are actually facing the sun at the warmest part of the day, either midday or early afternoon. So there's certainly some very easy passive measures one can take. I know in China, largely through glare issues, there's now a mandate to try and reduce the building envelope to a maximum of 40% glazing, which is a huge difference from the buildings that we were even putting up 5 or even 10 years ago. So that's a huge reduction in kind of glazed envelope. So things are becoming more heavier construction, more insulated, less prone to kind of solar gains, which will obviously reduce your kind of cooling costs, particularly in a country like India, where you have pretty extreme weather in terms of you're in cooling mode quite a lot of the year. So I do think that what buildings look like is going to change in the next 15 years to what we've been designing and putting up in the last 15 years, almost certainly.
Okay, so passively designed buildings, low glazing buildings, especially for tropical countries, and orientation of buildings as per their location. I think these are some of the things Russell has just mentioned. Another one, I think it goes for the pole tower that you have designed. So one of the questions is, what are the complexities of designing a tall yet low energy building, given the high energy use? Because obviously for transportation, vertical transportation, for air conditioning, we would be using a lot of energy. So how do you maintain both a super tall building as well as a low energy building?
Sorry, can you you broke up a little bit for me. Can you just repeat?
What are the complexities of designing a tall yet low energy building?
Okay, great questions. Yes. Well, one of the biggest factors, look, I like designing tall buildings. I design a lot of tall buildings, but in many, many ways, tall buildings don't really make a lot of economic sense. And certainly anything over 300 or 400 meters really doesn't, incrementally every meter you're building is exponentially getting more and more expensive. So I think there is, I used to work at SOM, and we figured out, I think there was a threshold at 400 meters, which is still pretty tall. Anything you're building beyond that, you're doing for other reasons that are probably not economic, whether that's ego or whether that's whatever. The Shanghai Tower is 630 meters, designed by Gensler, but that was a requirement from the Shanghai government because they wanted a building on their skyline that was going to attract other people and make it a world city. So sometimes there's lots of motivations for building tall, but they're usually not economic in the strict sense. And building tall, one of the biggest factors that we have is obviously elevators. The taller you go, the more people you have to transport to the top. And elevatoring has probably reached its peak in terms of speeds that we can take people from ground level to level 80 or 110 or whatever we're taking. We can't go any faster. And Shanghai Tower had some of the fastest elevators in the world, 20 meters per second, 60 feet a second, which is pretty fast. But they're actually uncomfortable to be in at that speed. And it's not going up, it's actually coming down that is the problem. Your inner ear becomes unbalanced and people start to feel ill. So we had to reduce the speed on the elevators to something more like 17 meters per second, just because we found the building occupants were being uncomfortable at that speed. So that's a huge inhibitor in terms of how tall you can go, because obviously it's dependent on how many people you can move up to floors. The other thing that has a huge impact on building efficiency and performance is the taller the elevator shaft is, the more you get something called stack effect, which you cannot avoid in a tall building. As soon as someone opens a door at grade level to get into the lobby, that air comes into the building, it goes up the shaft and it goes up the top, and it wreaks havoc in summer and winter. And a lot of air ingress and egress happens through the elevator shaft, which is pretty difficult to control unless you highly lobby every single level, which is expensive. So tall buildings present a lot of challenges in that regard. The other thing that we looked at, and you mentioned Pearl River Tower, one of the buildings I did, one of the strategies that we had, that was we were aiming to get to net zero energy on that building. We didn't make it, but we did get somewhere near 40% more efficient than China code, which was a pretty impressive effort because China code is pretty strict. But one of the methods we approached in that was to use a water-based system rather than an air-based system. Normally, buildings are air-conditioned with air, naturally enough. But air is not a very good or very efficient cooling or heating medium, but water is. So either using chilled water or heated water is actually a better way and a more comfortable way to actually condition a building, a tall building particularly. And it also requires less of a structural and services sandwich. So you can buy this, you can build the same amount of floor plate for something that's restricted in height. So it's more efficient from just a material usage. So one of the advantages of tall buildings is that when you're building on that scale, even very small incremental things like 0.5 meter floor to floor level distance, when you're building 100 meters of it, is a significant, 100 floors of it, is a significant amount of building that you're actually saving in terms of building envelope. That's over and above all the other building systems that you could employ to make it more efficient. So tall buildings do pose particular challenges in terms of efficiency. And I would argue that buildings over a certain height are intrinsically inefficient anyway. So even though I'm a tall building guy. So.
Okay. So that was from Russell. Vivek, you would like to add something because you have a huge, immense experience in electricals and automation, so, in buildings, energy efficiency, you would like to add something there?
Yeah, so I think in some way he's answered the question on the energy efficiency part and the reducing the carbon footprint. But I would still say, how important is building automation and bringing automation technologies to building design? How important it is, and is it you feel that it is mandatory for every building to be automated, not just to reduce the carbon footprint, but also keeping the users in mind, people who would be occupying the building?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be increasingly a move to more automation in buildings just to make them more efficient. If you kind of think that cell phone usage now, as opposed to 15, 20 years ago, it's become ubiquitous. We're used to these. And we're used to these now interacting with our building and our workplace, even if it's just as simple as, ordering a sandwich for lunch or whatever, that you don't even have to move from your desk. So technology and building sensors are going to more and more play a role in how you control your working environment, whether that's level of artificial light, whether it's your conditioned space, whether it's just some of the services that you're going to use while you're in your workplace. Invariably, we're going to go to more and more automated kind of systems. And I mentioned elevators earlier on. The technology now that's going to be used to solve the elevator problem, because the lift speed has reduced the vertical height of buildings because there's just a certain capacity of speed you can't go to anymore. There's actually a group called ThyssenKrupp out of Germany that are actually looking at building elevators that are much, much slower, but they have more cabs in a single shaft that can actually go up and across and back down. So it's a technology that was actually used in the 60s. It's called a paternoster, which used to go up and down, and people used to step on it and get off, and then on a floor, and then they could join again. You're not going to be able to do that, but it's the same principle that there might be 8 or 10 or 11 elevators in one shaft that are basically going up, going across, and going back down. They can travel horizontally as well as vertically. So the way that you deal with a capacity issue is to add more cabs rather than increasing the speed. So that's going to take a whole level of technology in itself to kind of make sure that operates. There is a prototype being built by ThyssenKrupp. That's going to have a huge impact because it's going to make cores, in theory, much smaller as well, and therefore more efficient in terms of the amount of kind of physical core you're building as opposed to the leasable area. So there's technologies at a number of levels, both from the kind of occupancy perspective, the technology perspective, and even facade perspective in terms of automating facades and screening for solar control, which have been out for a while, but they're getting more and more sophisticated.
Well, I think
so yes, the more automation.
Yeah. So I think it's obvious that buildings of the future will definitely use more and more technology, and it will be more user centric. How the user is going to interact with the building, and with the advent of mobile and the mobile applications, I think his office control would be all on his mobile. So moving to perspective of lighting, this lighting as a subject, how important you feel is lighting, selection of fixtures for designing your building, and how do you incorporate lighting in your building designs?
Well, I'm not a lighting designer, and I like to employ a lighting designer when I'm designing my buildings, just because I wouldn't like me to be the decision maker on that. I think I'm kind of more interested in trying to get as much natural daylight into my building and rely less and less on artificial light as much as possible. Obviously, that's dependent on the type of program you're building and the size of building that you're building. But I'm not sure I'm best placed to be able to answer your question in terms of kind of fitting selection. I tend to leave that to others. But I try not to rely on that lighting too much. I'd much rather, from my perspective, I'd much rather rely on natural daylight as much as possible rather than artificial light. But that was a pretty weak response to your question, but I don't know how to answer it.
No issues, Russell. Good, thanks. So, Sapna, I think over to you.
Yeah, I think what Russell has highlighted here is that while our buildings are getting complex day by day, the technology is also keeping pace in terms of not only the materials but also in terms of the systems that we are developing. And we'll just take two last questions before we wrap up this session of ADEX. Russell, we have a question here. Does, if we are repurposing our old buildings, will it help solve the issue of high property rates in urban cities?
Sorry,
if we are repurposing and if we are repurposing and repositioning our old buildings, will it help reduce the property costs in the urban areas, the city centers?
Oh, I don't know about that. I think it's supply and demand. I think at that point. So I don't know that it will reduce things. I mean, I'm hoping that the combination of repositioning buildings and the kind of improvements in technology and air quality that we're going to hopefully be installing in all our new work. And Gensler has committed to be carbon neutral on all their projects by 2030. So we've only got 9 years to achieve that. But I don't know the answer to the kind of real estate value piece to that, but I think we're all going to have to up our games as designers to design and develop the best possible workplace that we possibly, or hotel, or whatever it is, mixed use development that we can, because I do think people, despite what was mentioned earlier, I think people will want the best experience, just as an activity, but they're also going to want the best conditions that they can possibly can and get in any building. And I think that's going to drive up standards and qualities. And, Joe Biden in the US is already making it more restrictive from a building code perspective. So I think there's an inevitable kind of force here that's going to, and rightly so, push everybody to up their game from a kind of performance perspective, which is going to increase experience. And the properties or the schemes that don't do that will be less desirable, and therefore, will not be leased or not be frequented in the same way. So I think it's good. I think COVID has kind of focused a lot of people in terms of a shakeup that we probably needed anyway. It's just compressed that. I think of the retail market, and there was a lot of, I don't know about India, but in the US there was a lot of failing big retailers that were struggling before COVID, and COVID has kind of refocused everybody to another generation of the shopping and retail experience. And I think that's going to play out whether that's in the hotel business or whether it's a commercial office building or even residential for that market. I think it's going to be a spur that we all need for whatever building type we're designing. So I'm pretty optimistic about all of that.
So maybe even if not cost, but it still opens up more space in city centers because you are utilizing the underutilized buildings now. So
Right.
probably that's one of the biggest advantages. One last question we'll take is, you have experience in working in many countries. So how, whether it is Europe, US, even in Asia, how has all that experience influenced your design?
Oh, goodness. I think what's interesting for me is just, the constant rethinking of an office building in Zurich or Chicago or Mumbai or Shanghai is so dependent on the kind of climatic, geographic conditions, and certain things work better when you've got a heating and cooling climate, something like Beijing. Your building kind of approach and philosophy can be similar to somewhere in Germany because they have a heating and cooling season, whereas probably in Mumbai or the Middle East, you're in cooling mode all year round. You have no heating season, just because it's too hot. So that for me, that tends to be over and above the building program that I'm designing. I'm always very mindful of the kind of climate that I'm in. And that's a huge driver for just tweaking or just trying to reinterpret something that I've done before, even if it's a similar building type. That climatic or geographical kind of difference just gives you a different edge to reinterpret what you've done before and hopefully push you onto something that you hadn't thought about before. So that's what I love about working in China or India. I'd love to be back in India, by the way. I mean, I've probably been to India 20, 25 times. So whether it's for a high rise or a reposition or anything else, I'm always open to coming back to India. So that's kind of what I enjoy about the challenge of working around the world. I've been very, very lucky. I've probably worked in pretty much every continent there is. So yeah, not so much in Africa, but everywhere else.
Okay, fantastic. Vivek, anything you would like to add before we wrap up this segment of our program?
No,
I not really. Sorry, go on.
Just taking from his last statement about India, because we don't know much about your work in India. So if you could just talk about anything which is already underway or finished in India, if you could just tell about any of your projects here.
Well, I've always had a kind of mixed experience in India, whether I've been at SOM or Smith Gill or even Gensler. We had a proposal in with Oberoi in Mumbai for a modest tall building, 200 meters high, and they were very, very keen for us to get a proposal in quickly because they wanted to start straight away. That was in August, and it's still on hold. So, India has potentially been a source of frustration for me just because it tends to take much longer to realize something from inception to completion. And that's been a recurring theme for me. But we do have two offices. Gensler has two offices in Bangalore and Mumbai that we do a lot of work in, and all sorts of, from workplace to office buildings to business parks to master planning. And occasionally they ask me in to, especially if it's a tall building, to help them out. But we've yet to realize a tall building in India, Gensler that is, but we are doing a lot of other work in India. So if you go to www.gensler.com and you look at our Bangalore and Mumbai offices, then you'll see some of our work in India. So
thank you.
Helps.
Thank you, Russell.
Yeah. So thanks, Mr. Gilchrist, once again for those most informative and interesting talk points and answering the audience queries that we have received. I'm sure our viewers have some very valuable takeaways from today's session. So let me at this point now invite Mr. Remel Behel, Head for Enterprise Business, Havells India Limited, to express our sincere gratitude. In fact, just to introduce Mr. Remel, Remel Behel is the Head for Enterprise Business, responsible for working with architects, consultants, interior designers, industry, government, and infrastructure and key commercial projects. And he has an experience of more than 26 years in the industry, working with large MNCs, and his expertise in enterprise solutions, business development, strategic planning, and sales. So, Remel, over to you to express our gratitude to our eminent speaker today.
Thank you, Sapna. Good afternoon, friends. Good afternoon, Russell. On behalf of Havells, it's an honor and a privilege to propose a vote of thanks to our honored guest, Mr. Russell Gilchrist, the design director at Gensler. I think each of your projects has been an opportunity, to have an experience which has been unique and memorable in terms of not only architecture but as well as technology. I was very impressed with this Chicago repurposing project, the post office project, as you mentioned. It was I would say, a unique project. The scale and complexity of the project was truly mind-boggling. Whatever we could understand from whatever you shared with us, I think it's a unique and a landmark transformation of an post office into an office space. I was, also very impressed with your thoughts on the use of technology, whether it is the air quality part of it, the sensors, the use of sensors, and the use, or I would say minimal use of lighting, as you put it. I think we at Havells are also committed to providing energy efficient electrical products and solutions for similar world-class projects that actually push the boundaries of architecture and technology. The way you explained all the topics was exemplary. The following of protocols, the frictionless use of technology, the emphasis on air quality. And we at Havells also imbibe the philosophy of working in close collaboration with our clients, partners, and stakeholders to achieve similar successful and sustainable outcomes. So I would also like to thank all the honorable participants who have taken time out to participate in this ADEX series. And I would like to thank the organizing team from Reality Plus, as well as our Havells Marcom team. Thanks to everybody. Thank you all and have a great day ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Well, for expressing our sincere thanks on behalf of Realty Plus and Havells India to our speaker of the day. Thanks, Vivek, for being here, asking some very relevant questions to our speaker, and our audience for sending in their queries, some very interesting questions that we received from our audience. And most importantly, thanks to our speaker of the day, architect Russell Gilchrist, for sharing his knowledge with the Indian design fraternity in spite of very late hours back in Chicago. Thanks, Russell. Thank you so much with us. So, dear viewers, keep watching this space as we bring to you yet another acclaimed design expert on April 8th. So, mark your calendars. Till then, thanks and goodbye. Thanks, Russell. Thanks, Vivek. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.